There's a particular kind of human trafficking that happens among the wealthy, not brutal or violent like we imagine trafficking, but transactional, calculated, dressed in silk, and formalized in marriage contracts. Between 1870 and 1914, approximately 300 American heiresses were systematically exported to Europe, married to impoverished aristocrats in transactions that everyone involved understood were business deals, not love matches. These women, called dollar princesses by the British press, with a mixture of fascination and contempt, represented approximately $220 million in American wealth, roughly $6 billion in today's currency, transferred from New World commerce to Old World titles. Before we expose the international marriage market that turned women into currency and titles into merchandise, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what you're about to discover is human trafficking at the highest social levels, a systematic trade in daughters that everyone pretended was romance. Turn on notifications, because we're revealing how American fortunes rescued European aristocracy while destroying the women who carried those fortunes across the Atlantic. Drop a comment telling us whether you think these marriages were voluntary when fathers controlled the money and mothers orchestrated the sales. And share this video because the dollar princess trade is the dark foundation of every romance novel about American heiresses and British lords. Except the real stories weren't romantic, they were tragic. Subscribe now because understanding how wealthy families traded their daughters like commodities changes everything about how we see both old money and inherited titles. This is the story of how an entire marriage market was created, how American millionaires desperate for social legitimacy collided with British aristocrats desperate for money, how daughters became the medium of exchange. This is the story of women like Consuelo Vanderbilt, who we've discussed, but also May Gole, who brought $17 million to the Duke of Roxburgh, and Mary Leiter, who brought her father's department store fortune to Lord Curzon, and Virginia Boninge, who brought $2 million to the Earl of Deerhurst. This is the story of the lawyers and marriage brokers and social climbers who facilitated these transactions, who literally published catalogues listing available heiresses with their estimated dowries, creating a market as organized as any commodity exchange. And this is the story of what happened to these women once the transactions were complete. The loveless marriages, the cruel in-laws, the isolation of being foreign, nouveau riche, and unwelcome in the very aristocracy they'd purchased entry to. The dollar princess trade began in the 1870s, accelerated in the 1880s and 1890s, peaked between 1895 and 1905, and continued until World War I destroyed both the excess wealth and the mystique of European aristocracy. It was driven by two complementary crises: American millionaires who had money but no social legitimacy, and British aristocrats who had titles but no money. The American side was simple. The Industrial Revolution had created unprecedented wealth: railroad magnates, mining tycoons, manufacturing barons, men who had gone from nothing to millions in a single generation. But they couldn't buy acceptance in American society. Old New York families, the Astors and Schermerhorns, looked down on them as vulgar new money, no matter how many millions they had. Marrying their daughters to European aristocracy was a way to leapfrog American social hierarchies. If your daughter was a duchess, Mrs. Astor couldn't exclude you. You'd literally outranked her. The European side was equally simple. British aristocracy in the late 19th century was in financial crisis. Agricultural depression meant that landed estates, the traditional source of aristocratic income, were producing far less revenue. Tenant farmers couldn't pay rent. Land values were declining. Meanwhile, aristocratic lifestyles remained expensive, maintaining ancestral castles, keeping up appearances, meeting social obligations. Many noble families were land-rich but cash-poor. They owned properties worth millions, but had no liquid assets, couldn't pay for repairs to their estates, couldn't fund their lifestyles. American heiresses offered solution. Their dowries could rescue estates, fund repairs, pay off debts, maintain aristocratic lifestyles for another generation. And what the aristocrats offered in return was exactly what American millionaires wanted: titles, legitimacy, the ability to say their daughter was a duchess or countess. It was perfect arbitrage. One side had something the other wanted. Market mechanisms emerged to facilitate exchange. The facilitators were American mothers, usually. Women like Alva Vanderbilt, who understood that titles were the ultimate status symbol. They would take their daughters to London for the season, the annual social calendar when aristocratic families presented their eligible sons and daughters. But American heiresses weren't just participating in the season, they were shopping. And being shopped, marriage brokers emerged. Individuals who specialized in making introductions between American money and British titles. One of the most successful was Consuelo Iznaga, an American who had married the Duke of Manchester in 1876. She introduced dozens of American heiresses to impoverished aristocrats, receiving gifts for successful matches. Another was Mary Elizabeth Brunk, a social climber who created what was essentially a catalogue, listing American heiresses with their estimated fortunes. Circulated privately among British aristocratic families, the catalogue would note, Miss Alice, father in railroads, estimated worth $10 million, dowry likely $1 to $2 million, plain but intelligent, no scandal. Or Miss Marina, father in steel manufacturing, estimated worth $5 million, dowry likely $500,000 to $1 million, beautiful, musical, father willing to negotiate. These were literally trading cards for human beings, and they were used by impoverished aristocrats to identify the most financially advantageous matches. Chapter 2. The transaction mechanics. The actual process of arranging a dollar princess marriage was remarkably standardized by the 1890s. There was a protocol, understood by all parties, that governed how these transactions occurred. Step 1 was the presentation. American families would arrive in London for the season. Take a house in Mayfair or Belgravia, hire the right servants, get presented at court. Presentation at court was crucial. It required sponsorship from someone already accepted, usually an American who had previously married into aristocracy. Once presented, the daughter could attend balls, parties, social events where eligible aristocrats would be present. But this wasn't organic social mixing. The mothers were strategic. They identified specific targets, aristocrats with the right titles and the wrong financial situations. A duke was preferable to an earl to a viscount. Older titles were better than newer ones. Certain families were more prestigious than others. And the aristocrats were equally strategic. They needed to assess not just the daughter's dowry, but whether the family would provide ongoing financial support. This assessment was remarkably businesslike. Aristocratic families would investigate the Americans' wealth, confirm the source, estimate the liquid assets. They would determine whether the fortune was stable, whether the father was likely to continue making money or had reached his peak. They would consider the daughter's health, her ability to produce heirs, her social skills, her appearance. It was exactly like evaluating a business investment, because that's what it was. Step 2 was the negotiation. Once both sides had identified a suitable match, the families would meet. Ostensibly social visits, but really business meetings. The mothers would discuss generalities. The fathers would discuss specifics. American fathers quickly learned to hire British lawyers familiar with aristocratic marriage settlements. The legal structures were complex, designed to protect aristocratic estates. The typical arrangement had 3 components: a dowry paid upon marriage, usually between $500,000 and $5 million, depending on the title and the father's wealth. An annual income provided to the daughter, ensuring she had her own money, typically $25,000 to $100,000 per year, and financial obligations for maintaining the aristocratic estate, repairs to the castle, paying off family debts, sometimes ongoing support. These negotiations could take months, lawyers drafting and revising settlement agreements, each side trying to maximize their benefit. The American side wanted guarantees, assurances that the daughter would be treated well, that she would have status within the aristocratic family, that the title would actually transfer. The British side wanted maximum financial benefit with minimum obligation. They wanted the money without accepting the daughter as an equal. The daughter's opinion was rarely solicited. These were marriages arranged by fathers and lawyers. The bride was informed of the decision, not consulted about it. Step 3 was the formal engagement, announced in newspapers, celebrated with parties, presented as a love match, even when everyone knew it wasn't. The engagement period would last several months, allowing time for wedding preparations and for finalizing the legal settlements. During this time, the couple might spend chaperoned time together, getting to know each other minimally, but there was no expectation of romance. Both sides understood what this was. He was getting money. She was getting a title. Affection was optional. Step 4 was the wedding, usually held in America. Elaborate affairs attended by hundreds, covered extensively in society pages. American newspapers treated these weddings as triumphs. Miss Name marries Duke of Title. American beauty conquers British aristocracy. The subtext was always nationalistic, Americans proving they could buy anything, even ancient European prestige. British newspapers were more ambiguous, celebrating the financial rescue of noble families, but also expressing discomfort with Americans invading aristocracy. The term "dollar princess" was coined by British press in the 1890s. It was not flattering. It emphasized that these women had purchased their titles, that they were fundamentally commercial. After the wedding, the couple would travel to Europe, usually settling at the aristocratic estate, and this is when the reality would set in. Chapter 3. The Case Studies. To understand what the dollar princess trade actually meant for the women involved, we need to look at specific cases, the marriages that resulted from these transactions. Consuelo Vanderbilt's case we've covered. But it's worth emphasizing that hers was not unusual. Forced marriage, loveless relationship, years of misery, eventual divorce. What made her case notable was that she wrote about it, her autobiography. The glitter and the gold exposed the whole system, but there were hundreds of others, and most didn't write memoirs. May Golay married the 8th Duke of Roxburgh in 1903. She brought approximately $17 million to the marriage, roughly $500 million today. May was the daughter of Ogden Goulet, New York real estate magnate. She had been carefully educated in Europe, spoke French fluently, was culturally sophisticated. The Duke was 35, had been looking for a wealthy bride for years, had a reputation for coldness and formality. The marriage settlement gave May £50,000 annually, about $6 million today, an enormous sum. Plus the Duke received $3 million immediately. The wedding at St. Thomas Church in New York was attended by 800 guests. The reception was at the Golay Mansion. Newspapers called it the wedding of the decade. May moved to Flores Castle in Scotland, one of Britain's largest castles, 70 rooms, requiring staff of 40. She lived there for 44 years until her death in 1937, and by all accounts, she was miserable. The Duke treated her with polite indifference. They had one son, which fulfilled the primary obligation, then lived essentially separate lives. May wrote letters to her sister describing the isolation. "I live in this vast, cold house surrounded by servants who resent me, married to a man who speaks to me only when necessary. I am immensely wealthy and absolutely alone." The Duke's mother, the Dowager Duchess, made clear that May was tolerated but not accepted. She was American, knew money, she had purchased a title but not respect. May spent decades trying to prove herself, funding restoration of the castle, supporting local charities, everything she could to win acceptance. She never did. When she died in 1937, the obituaries in British newspapers noted her generosity to the estate, but also emphasized that she had been an American heiress, the implication clear that she had never truly belonged. Mary Leiter married Lord Curzon in 1895. She was the daughter of Levi Leiter, founder of the Marshall Field's department store empire. Lord Curzon was brilliant, ambitious, politically connected, and broke. His family's estate was mortgaged. He needed money to fund his political career. Mary brought approximately $1.5 million in dowry, plus her father agreed to provide ongoing financial support. This marriage was considered one of the more successful. Curzon genuinely seemed to appreciate Mary. They had 3 daughters. Mary supported his political career. When he became Viceroy of India in 1899, she served as vicereine, famous for her social skills and diplomacy. But even this supposedly successful marriage reveals the power imbalance. Curzon's letters to his family show that he viewed Mary as useful, valuable, but never as an equal. "She has done well," he wrote. "Her American energy serves well in this position." When Mary died in 1906, only 36 years old, worn out by the demands of official life and 3 pregnancies in 4 years, Curzon mourned her. But his primary concern, expressed in private letters, was about money. Would her father continue the financial support? Would the settlement remain in effect? Even in death, Mary was valued primarily for her financial utility. Anna Gould married Count Bonny de Castellane in 1895. She was the daughter of J. Gould, railroad magnate and robber baron. Bonny was French aristocracy, charming, cultured, and a notorious spendthrift. Anna's dowry was staggering, approximately $5 million, plus an annual income of $200,000. Bonny spent it all. Within 10 years, he had burned through everything. Building a palace in Paris, throwing elaborate parties, collecting art. The marriage was a disaster. Bonny was openly unfaithful, verbally abusive, treated Anna with contempt. Anna divorced him in 1906, one of the first dollar princesses to escape, but she lost custody of her children. French law favored fathers. She remarried in 1908 to Bonny's cousin, Prince Hélie de Talleyrand-Périgord. A happier marriage, but she never regained her children. The Gould case became a scandal. Newspapers covered every detail. It exposed the ugliness behind the fairy tale, the abuse, the exploitation. But it didn't stop the trade. Families continued exporting daughters. Aristocrats continued buying brides. Because the fundamental economics hadn't changed, Americans still wanted titles, Europeans still needed money. Chapter 4. The British Perspective. Understanding the dollar princess trade requires examining the British aristocratic perspective, how they justified these marriages, how they rationalized selling their heritage. The British aristocracy in the late Victorian and Edwardian period was experiencing existential crisis. Their world was ending, and they knew it. Agricultural depression meant their traditional economic base was collapsing. Land that had supported families for centuries was becoming unprofitable. Death duties, introduced in 1894 and increased in 1909, meant that aristocratic estates were being taxed on inheritance, forcing many families to sell properties to pay taxes. The political power of aristocracy was declining. The House of Commons was becoming more important than the House of Lords. Democracy was eroding hereditary privilege. Many aristocrats saw American heiresses as a way to delay the inevitable, to maintain their lifestyles for one more generation. The rationalization was that these marriages rescued historic estates, preserved cultural heritage. If American money could repair castles and maintain great houses, that was a service to Britain. The Morning Post in 1902 published an editorial defending dollar princess marriages. These unions bring needed capital to our nation, preserve architectural treasures, and prove that America, for all its commercial excess, recognizes the value of our ancient traditions. This framing allowed aristocrats to feel noble about selling themselves. They weren't prostituting their heritage, they were preserving it. But private letters and diaries reveal a more cynical reality. The 9th Duke of Marlborough, who married Consuelo Vanderbilt, wrote to a friend before the wedding, "I have purchased my financial security. The price is tolerating an American wife. It seems a fair exchange." The Earl of Essex, negotiating with the father of an American heiress, wrote, "I believe we can reach agreement on price. Her appearance is acceptable, her breeding inferior, but her fortune adequate." These weren't romances. They were transactions, and the British aristocrats were quite open about it in private. What's remarkable is how explicitly mercenary the British press could be in 1895. The World published a list of available aristocrats with their estimated market value: duke, unmarried, no scandal, good estate, worth approximately $2 million in dowry; viscount, widower, 2 children, estate mortgaged, available for $500,000 or more. This was published in a mainstream newspaper, not a tabloid. The trade was so normalized that it could be discussed openly. The British aristocracy also developed sophisticated legal mechanisms to extract maximum value while protecting their estates. Marriage settlements were structured so that American money would flow into the estate but would be difficult for the American wife to reclaim if the marriage failed. Primogeniture laws meant that even if an American heiress's money saved an estate, her children would inherit according to British law, eldest son getting everything. If an American heiress had only daughters, the estate and title would pass to the husband's male relatives. Her money would have rescued an estate her own children couldn't inherit. These laws were explained to American fathers during negotiations, but many didn't fully understand the implications. They thought they were securing their daughters' futures. Instead, they were funding estates their grandchildren might never see. The British aristocracy also excluded American wives socially, even after taking their money. Aristocratic mothers would make clear that American daughters-in-law were tolerated, but not truly accepted. They could use the title, but would never be considered genuine aristocracy. This served to maintain British aristocratic identity, even as American money kept them afloat. They could take the money while maintaining superiority. One particularly cruel example comes from the Duchess of Marlborough's letters about Consuelo. "She is rich, which is fortunate, but she lacks breeding. One can always tell American girls, they have a certain boldness, a lack of natural refinement. Money cannot buy what we are born with." This from a woman whose estate was being saved by Consuelo's money, whose lifestyle was funded by Vanderbilt millions. The cognitive dissonance was remarkable, simultaneously dependent on American wealth while maintaining contempt for Americans. But this cognitive dissonance was necessary. Acknowledging that they needed American money would have meant acknowledging their decline. Much easier to pretend they were doing Americans a favor, graciously accepting their money in exchange for elevating nouveau riche daughters. Chapter 5. The American Complicity. While the British aristocracy was selling titles, American families were eagerly buying. The dollar princess trade required willing sellers and willing buyers. American complicity in this system was total. Parents, lawyers, social climbers, even the women themselves sometimes. All participated in commodifying daughters. The mothers were often the primary drivers. Women like Alva Vanderbilt, who had clawed their way up American social hierarchies and wanted the ultimate status symbol. Marrying a daughter to a duke meant you had arrived, you had achieved something. Mrs. Astor couldn't. Your daughter outranked everyone in New York society. These mothers would spend years preparing daughters for the marriage market. Education in European culture, languages, music, art. They would manage their daughters' social debuts to maximize visibility to European aristocrats, and they would ruthlessly suppress any objections the daughters had. This wasn't about the daughter's happiness. It was about family prestige. The fathers were complicit differently. They provided the money. They understood these were business transactions. Many American millionaires had built their fortunes through ruthless business practices. Selling their daughters was just another deal. Some fathers were reluctant, didn't want to lose their daughters to Europe. But the mothers usually prevailed. The pattern was consistent. Mother wanted title. Father provided money. Daughters' wishes were irrelevant. American lawyers who specialized in these settlements were highly paid facilitators of the trade. They would handle negotiations, structure the financial arrangements, ensure the American family got maximum prestige for their money. Some of these lawyers were quite open about the transactional nature. One New York lawyer published an article in 1903 titled "Purchasing a Peerage, a Legal Guide." The article explained how to value different titles, how to structure settlements to maximize the American family's leverage, how to ensure the daughter had some financial protection. It was remarkably cynical, treating marriage as pure business transaction, but it was also honest about what these arrangements were. American newspapers participated by celebrating these marriages as triumphs, treating them as romantic when everyone knew they weren't. The coverage created demand. Every time a dollar princess married a duke, other American families wanted the same. It became competitive. Who could marry their daughter to the highest-ranking aristocrat? Who could negotiate the best settlement? The daughters themselves had varying degrees of complicity. Some, like Consuelo Vanderbilt, were clearly forced, actively resisted, were victims of parental tyranny, but others embraced it, saw marrying an aristocrat as their destiny, wanted the title and the status. These women had been raised in competitive, status-obsessed environments, trained from childhood to value social position above personal happiness. For them, marrying a duke was success, achieving what they'd been groomed for. The tragedy is that even the willing participants often ended up miserable because wanting a title is different from living with the reality of a loveless marriage. Helena Zimmerman married the 9th Duke of Manchester in 1900. She was thrilled, had pursued the Duke actively, was proud of becoming a duchess. Within a year, she was writing desperate letters to her father. "I thought I wanted this, but I am so lonely. He treats me with cold politeness. I have made a terrible mistake." But by then it was too late. Divorce was scandalous, would have meant losing the title, which would have made the whole transaction meaningless. So she stayed, as most dollar princesses did, trapped in marriages that were financial arrangements with no emotional content. The American complicity extended to romanticizing the trade in popular culture. Novels about American heiresses marrying British lords became bestsellers. Plays about dollar princesses ran on Broadway. These fictionalized versions portrayed the marriages as romantic, love-conquering class difference, American spirit winning British hearts, the reality, loveless transactions, unhappy women. Exploitation on both sides was carefully hidden. This romanticization continues today. Every historical romance novel about an American heiress and a British lord is participating in the erasure. The real story wasn't romantic, it was tragic, but we prefer the fiction. Chapter 6. The End of the Trade. The dollar princess trade peaked between 1895 and 1905. During those 10 years, approximately 150 American heiresses married European aristocrats. But by 1910, the trade was declining, and by 1920, it had essentially ended. Several factors combined to kill it. First, World War I destroyed the mystique of European aristocracy. British lords, who had seemed sophisticated and superior, were revealed as incompetent military leaders. The war killed millions, devastated Europe, and made aristocratic privilege seem obscene when working-class men were dying in trenches. American families who had worshipped European titles began questioning whether those titles meant anything. Second, the economic basis for the trade shifted. American income taxes, introduced in 1913, and estate taxes made it harder for American millionaires to transfer large fortunes. The settlements that had been possible in 1900, $2 or $3 million in dowry plus ongoing support, became impossible to structure after tax law changes. Third, aristocratic estates continued declining. The money from American heiresses had delayed collapse, but not prevented it. Many families that had married American heiresses in 1895 were broke again by 1915, demonstrating that the arrangement wasn't sustainable. Fourth, divorce became more acceptable, particularly for Americans. Dollar princesses started escaping their marriages. Consuelo Vanderbilt divorced in 1921. Anna Gould had divorced in 1906. As divorce became an option, the transaction made less sense. Why pay $2 million for a title your daughter might not keep? And finally, American society changed. The obsession with European validation declined. After World War I, America was clearly the world's leading power, economically, politically, culturally. American families didn't need British titles to feel legitimate. They were creating their own aristocracy. The last major dollar princess marriage was in 1921. After that, occasional marriages happened, but they were individual choices, not systematic transactions. The trade was over, leaving behind approximately 300 women who had been sold, and the wreckage of their lives. The outcomes for dollar princesses varied. Some, like May Guillet, endured unhappy marriages until death. Some, like Consuelo Vanderbilt, eventually divorced and rebuilt their lives. Some, like Mary Leiter, died young, worn out by the demands of their positions. A few, perhaps 20 or 30, found genuinely happy marriages. But they were the exception. The majority lived in varying degrees of unhappiness, trapped in arrangements that benefited everyone except them. Their fathers got prestige, their husbands got money. British estates were saved. American social climbers achieved their goals. The women paid the price. Today, the dollar princess trade is remembered, if at all, as a quaint historical footnote, an amusing aspect of Gilded Age excess. The reality that it was systematic commodification of women, that it was human trafficking at the highest social levels, that it destroyed lives, is conveniently forgotten. We prefer the romance novel version, the fiction that these marriages were love matches with financial advantages. But they weren't. They were business transactions where women were the currency, and understanding that, acknowledging it, changes how we see both American and European high society. The Gilded Age wasn't just extravagant, it was brutal, and women bore the brunt of that brutality. The dollar princess trade is the perfect symbol. Everything about it was expensive, elaborate, wrapped in silk, and celebrated in society pages. And underneath, it was the sale of human beings, dressed up as marriage, but fundamentally transactional. 300 women. Sold to the highest bidder, their happiness sacrificed for family prestige and aristocratic survival. That's the real story of the dollar princesses. Not romance, but tragedy. Not triumph, but exploitation, not love, but commerce. And we should remember it that way. If this exposure of the dollar princess trade as systematic human trafficking disguised as marriage shocked you, subscribe immediately, because we're continuing to reveal how the wealthy have always treated women as commodities, as currency, as things to be traded for advantage. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when we investigate another dark aspect of Gilded Age marriages, the arranged unions that built dynasties while destroying the women trapped in them. Drop a comment telling us whether you think these marriages were any different from prostitution when money was exchanged for use of women's bodies to produce heirs, and share this video because every historical romance that romanticizes American heiresses and British lords needs to acknowledge the trafficking underneath the fantasy. Subscribe now, because understanding that 300 women were systematically sold changes how we see marriage, wealth, and the real cost of aristocratic titles.